This is Life Bursts. I'm Matt.
And I'm Sarah.
We're bringing your stories to life. Welcome to Life Bursts. We are so excited that you could join us here in our new format and our new studio.
Yes, a big hello if you're listening to us on hillsradio.com.au, where you can still listen to us there, but you can also listen to us now in this new format, as Matt mentioned, on a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from. And we're also a podcast video, so you can now watch us as well while we have these conversations on YouTube. So thanks for joining us, whichever way you are listening to us. So today we're going to be talking to Matt and exploring your life story a little bit more, because that's what we do here at Life Burst. We share people's stories from the beginning of their life to where they are now and everything in between. So I suppose that iconic question that we always start with, Matt, is where did life start out for you?
Well, my life started out in Adelaide, and my dad was a bank manager, so we lived in the suburbs for a little bit down the south, around near the beach. But it wasn't long before we moved again, and we moved house. Dad was transferred to Renmark in the Riverland, where I spent a few years in kindergarten. Then we moved back to our house in Adelaide, and many years after that, my life was just a rolling set of moves of houses and towns, following the family about country South Australia and the Northern Territory. In fact, right about now, if I moved house right now, we'd be on average moving houses every 2.5 years of my life. So, got around a little bit.
Yeah, lots of adventures and stories, I'm sure, which
Yes.
we'll delve into. I'm curious, were there other siblings around you at the same time?
Yeah, I'm the eldest of three, so kept them in line as we went along. Lots of fun times.
So share with us some stories from the beginning of your life. Like, what's the earliest memory that you have?
Well, one of the earliest memories was my grandparents used to run a. It's still down in Victor Harbour. It's a campsite, but it's like a castle, a dare campsite. Some people will be familiar with that.
Yeah.
And so they were caretakers there. So I got to stay with them in the castle, which was very exciting, and even got to go up to the turret, the lookout. But having gone back there in recent years, I'm sure it was bigger back then. It's shrunk over the years.
Yes.
So lots of adventures, being able to go and be a part of that as well. But moving around, we got to meet new friends.
Oh no, I don't want to move on from that right now, okay? Because I'm sure that there are little kids that have seen that castle as they're driving in or out of Victor Harbour and have wondered what it's actually like on the inside. What is it actually like on the inside?
Yeah, well, you can still stay there as a campsite, but it's inside we used to have a big pool table, I remember, which you had to put money in. So I'd always just try to get the balls out without the money. I got to go back into the kitchen and see the workings back there and meet the chefs at the time, and it was fun exploring all the rooms. And I remember at one point they had to change over all the mattresses, and so in the area where my grandparents lived, they had all the mattresses stacked up, and it was just the most amazing maze that I could set up in the back room as a little kid. Good fun.
I was just imagining you were going to say something like you just like covered a whole room full of mattresses and just, like,
they were
jumped
already
on
there.
them.
Yeah, no, the maze, that was the fun.
Okay,
Yeah.
did you like bash into the side of the maze and knock everything? No?
Yeah, we had all sorts.
Yeah, I'm sure you would have. Every kid's dream to have a room full of mattresses.
Absolutely.
To bounce around on. Okay, now we can continue. Now you've talked about the castle. So you moved around a bit.
So moving around a bit, and that was as a kid an adventure. Every new place you got to go. I remember Dad coming home saying we're moving again, and kind of a sense of excitement for those first few moves, because where are we going to go? What's it going to be like? New house. But the tough side of that was you had to start to make friends all over again. You had to spend time sort of reinventing yourself, and it was lonely, some of those moves, because you didn't necessarily make friends right away. some places we were only in for 18 months and then we moved on again.
What would you say to kids who are possibly in that situation right now, that they've just gone to a new school, or maybe they have moved around a lot? What advice would you give to them?
Stick at it, just be yourself, I think is the advice I'd give. It was fun in those early years, but when I became a teenager, I think you've got all those things of your identity and your friendships, they start to become a bit more real, and that's where it got harder. So for me, I think I built resilience, having to just to be myself. But unfortunately, in some of those places, there were bullies. There were kids who, for whatever reason, didn't like me, even though I didn't retaliate. I was fairly passive, really. But through that, eventually found some good friends in each of those places who will gather around, and hopefully you can too if you're going through those situations. But each move, I think, I wouldn't be who I am now if it wasn't for having to start again in all those places and grow through it.
And some people like the idea of having to go somewhere new and reinvent themselves, and possibly they might see like they can be another person if they do something like that. But what you're saying is, don't try and be somebody that you're not. Just be yourself and you'll find friends no matter where you are or what you're doing.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, the teenage year move in particular, where I moved from a country town in South Australia up to a school in the Northern Territory, which was a big school. And suddenly kids my age were doing things that were illegal, and things that were smoking, and things that were I hadn't experienced at my past school. So there was definitely pressure to fit in and to do what they were doing, and to go to the parties and things that they were starting to have. And that clashed with my values, but it was a real tear to say, well, but I've got to fit in. So I really had to stand my ground. And fortunately, I found another set of friends who weren't really into those things, and so I didn't have to compromise what I thought was right, or and I'm glad for that. That stopped me from taking a trajectory which could have been pretty bad.
And high school is full of lots of different types of people and different groups of people, and if you just be yourself, ultimately from what you have shared, you do get to find those people that you are like, and that respect you, and that care about you, and have the same values and beliefs. So that must have been such a relief, but also a hard battle by the sounds of it in the beginning, of having all those pressures to do all those things.
Yeah, some of those moves in particular, and even little things like not of the drugs and alcohol, but even my family, nobody swore in my family. It was not something that was encouraged, but I found myself in those times starting to swear. And I actually had one friend pull me up on that and say, why you? He could see that I wasn't, I was just trying to fit in. Yeah. So fortunately around that time as well, I grew up going to church. I grew up looking at the church as just being dragged along, and all the little country towns we went to be honest, church was pretty boring. It was, nice people, but not a lot of kids my age. But around those years as well, I found a group of friends who went to church, and they seemed to really believe what they believed, and they were fun, and they were passionate about it. And so for me, that was a group that I started to be interested in, because they were genuine and caring and fun. And for me, that sort of clicked. This is something that I'd like to get to know a bit more of myself. All these things that I considered boring, maybe there's something to it.
We are chatting with Matt and exploring more of his story here on Life First with Sarah and Matt. So Matt, I think a lot of people could resonate with what you're saying, that church is boring. How did you get over that boredom factor of church?
Yeah, I think it really helped having that group of friends because they, like, we had a Bible sitting at home and I never read it. My family we're Christians, but I'd never read it, never shown interested in it. But this group were kind of knew stuff. They knew parts of the Bible. And I thought, well, hang on, I've written this off as boring. I don't want to go. I'm dragged along, but I haven't actually really looked into it myself. So I found myself, sneaking to read the Bible at home and stuff, which seems odd, but I think that helped change things. And then that group of young people also were expressing their faith in ways that were relevant to teenagers. Music was more music that I enjoyed listening to, those type of things. So it was good to spend time with them. But the real thing that changed for me was going on a camp.
Okay.
With that group of young people, and at the camp there was someone speaking there who we just shared a little bit about how he understood everything God's done for us, that God's good, that God loves us, that God's forgiven us for anything we've done, and he used some pretty powerful images in that, and it made sense to me suddenly at that point, like it hadn't before. It clicked. And so I can't remember really what I did, but at some point I sort of thought, this is for me, and this is going to change. And I remember praying at the end of that camp. He challenged us to, if we do believe this stuff, not to just keep it silent, or he used the image of being a submarine Christian who kind of goes under the surface and then pops back up on Sundays, does all the right things and then goes back under, but to actually live out the good things that you believe.
Yeah.
So I prayed at that time, and I can't really explain it, but I definitely felt a real sense of something changed inside me at that camp, something that I went away from there completely different, completely my view of even going to school changed, because I could see, regardless of what friends I had or didn't have, I could get alongside the kids at school who had no friends. I could sort of seek them out and make them feel like life was worth living, just in simple ways. So I was only in year 9 at school, but my whole perspective on life changed from that camp.
I didn't have a particular moment like that, for example, but at high school, I was also one of those people that got alongside people and just talked with them who didn't have friends, or who were just sitting there, or who were upset or being bullied, or you could see that they were a little bit lost. And it is really special and important to do something like that. But that also takes a lot of courage to do something like that as well. So well done for getting alongside other people.
Yeah, I think having experienced it myself, I was able to take that and say, well, I know what it's like, and now I want to make a difference. I can, instead of even complaining about going to school and all those things, that all changed. I look forward to, I could get up in the morning going, right, what difference can I make today? Big change. It's a change of perspective. Not everyone will have the experience that I had, but we can all wake up with that perspective in everything we do every day.
So graduating and everything, did you have any sense of what you were going to do when you were older?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really sure. So we moved to Darwin in the Northern Territory, and I spent some time there volunteering in radio. Actually, back before that, from year 7, actually, I got into community radio. So I loved that. I loved that we could play music. I loved that we could have a chance to just speak to people in their homes and encourage them a little bit alongside my experience as well. So I continued that in Darwin, volunteering every weekend as I went through school. I got a part-time job, but as I finished school, I had no idea. I think lots of people were in that boat too. No idea what was next. Looking through the lists of university, what do I become? I had an inkling that maybe being a teacher was something that I'd like to do, but wasn't really sure. So I ended up taking 2 years after school just as to work and get my head around things. I spent a fair bit of time in a community radio station in all sorts of areas in the background, helping it to run, which was great.
Tell us about, this is a story that you have shared before, but tell us about your first ever radio show that you did.
Yeah, back in year 7. So there was somebody in the town that had a show and they were finishing up, and they put a note in the newsletter to say, anyone want to take on this shift? So for some reason in year 7 at school, I said, yeah, I'll give it a go. And for some reason they let me.
By yourself?
Well, I could have been. I was
okay.
initially.
Yeah.
So a little bit of training. First show, came on board, finished the first song, did the first announcement break, played the next song. Thought, yeah, that was all right. And got a phone call, and it was my parents at home and said, what happened? And I hadn't put the microphone on. So there was like probably a 2 minutes of amazing stuff. I'm sure it was great.
I'm sure it was.
But nothing went to air. I turned the microphone on, but I hadn't turned the fader up. So there you go. There's a lesson. And listening back to I do have some of those shows recorded on cassette. We tended to do that back then. And it was pretty bad. So
you were like 12, 13?
Something like that. Yeah.
You're allowed to be bad back then.
The number of times we ejected the CD before it was finished playing, or pressed the wrong thing, or just went dead air. Anyway, that's community radio, and that's what we love about it.
Yeah, pretty much.
But you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, okay. So you were in Darwin doing radio, working part-time, figuring out what life was going to look like for you. Did you figure it out? When did you figure it out?
Yeah, well, in the midst of all of that, after a year out of school, this young lady moved up to Darwin from Adelaide. Mm-hmm. She'd finished school down here, and she moved up to Darwin to work with her parents in a backpackers hostel that they ran. So she started uni there, and I got to know her a bit, and we got engaged. Yay. That year. And by the end of that year, we got married. So in the midst of all of that, it sort of felt like it was time to move from Darwin, to move out of home.
Cue picture of Matt and his wife getting married.
Yes.
It's a beautiful picture of your wife. She looks absolutely stunning, and so
she does.
She's like 18 in that photo as well.
She was, yes. She was pretty young. I was still pretty young too. But around that time, I felt like that thing that happened on camp, this desire to make a difference, and all that I shared, was how can I best live that out? And I'd, like I said, grown up with churches that were boring, but I discovered how good the message was. Okay. But I was watching all of my peers drift away from church, somehow just not connecting with the good stuff that I'd experienced. And I got that, so I thought, well, maybe I can be a part of helping churches to live out what they believe and express that in a way that people get, because it's good.
It's a big task for a young person to try and... Because it's a problem that's still happening today, that young people are still moving away from the church building itself. Yeah,
it's huge. And there's no easy solutions, but I thought, well, okay, at least I can start studying something in that direction. Okay. So my wife was also looking at, she was studying in Darwin, but was looking to transfer back to Adelaide, and her parents were actually looking to pack things up as well. So as it turns out, we all moved down to Adelaide at the end of that year. Beck and I got married, and then we all started study the following year. And I started training to become a minister, although I wasn't quite sure where that would end. Bachelor of Theology I took on.
I was going to ask what that was that you were studying.
Yeah.
Yes, I am talking to Matt and going a little bit further into his journey so far here on Life Bursts with Sarah and Matt. So, you've moved down to Adelaide now. What was Darwin like?
I love living up in the Northern Territory. The first place we lived was Nhulunbuy or Gove up on northeast Arnhem Land. Yes, so that's where I had those camp experiences, and that was just amazing. I got to do the Duke of Edinburgh Awards when I was there. I don't think I completed it, but we got to do some expeditions, which was really out in the bush. Like it's there's not many people up there. it's a mining town. There's some Aboriginal communities, but we really were out in the outback. And so we did a few expeditions, which was just fantastic, across scrubland into waterholes. One spot we stopped one night. We all it was hot. I mean, the Northern Territory gets hot.
Yeah.
We jumped in the lake. It was nearly nighttime. And then as we sort of looked in the rocks just near us, it was one of those kind of rocks with kind of holes and things in it, sort of porous rock. And along the side of the bank. And there was it must have been a massive brown snake, but you could just see one of its coils. It had gone to sleep for the night in this rock, which was warm. So we just saw that and thought, all right, let's get out of the water now and go back out to no crocodiles. They kept us inland, so it was supposedly safe. But yeah, those are the kind of things that we loved, particularly there. You could go driving on beaches and there was no one there, water holes, things. Yeah, it was great. But Darwin was good too. But yeah, having lived up there and moved back, I think even locals, you kind of acclimatise, but the humidity in the wet season over the summer months is huge. So you go out and hang washing on the line or do something with no effort and you'd be dripping with sweat. Some people just live in the air conditioning, so never acclimatise at all. I was fortunate that we had a house where it was upstairs was air conditioned, but I was downstairs, so I had to acclimatise. Your fan on full. Sometimes I slept on the tiles at night because it was the coolest place. So love lots of things, but some things I don't miss.
Like the heat and the humidity. And what about the locals that are still up there that you met? How did they acclimatise to this heat and crocodiles and humidity and... Yeah, how did they stay up there for so long? Yeah,
well, I think once there were some people who had been up there since Cyclone Tracy, and so they'd stuck it out. They refused to put air conditioners in. So there's some tried and true long-term locals. There's probably less and less of them now. But Darwin's a very transient place, so there's a lot of my friends don't live in Darwin anymore. They've gone to uni all around Australia and then now work scattered all over the place as well. And that tends to be what life's like up there. It's quite easy to get jobs because, can be, because people don't stick around. They miss home, don't cope with the heat, or various reasons. So, it's an interesting spot in that sense. Also very multicultural, which was really good. Growing up with all kinds of cultures around me, really, it was a good experience.
Now let's go, now you're in Adelaide.
Yeah.
How did you switch to that? Knowing that you travelled lots of different places before in your life, how did you fit in with Adelaide more full-time than before?
Yeah, well, I was newly married, so that was great. So it was a whole new adventure.
So exciting.
We found a unit to rent and started uni life, got part-time jobs and just enjoyed life as young adults. I volunteered as a youth leader at my church in Darwin, so we went to another church that was a bit bigger down here and thought won't get involved, but within a month we were very involved with a fairly big group of young people and really loved that. So we found plenty of things to do in our spare time. We didn't have a lot of spare time, but
it sounds like God was really much a part of your lives.
Yeah, I think that's that's my story, and that's why I've shared that experience of earlier, how I came to where I am. But I again wanted to make a difference and saw that the way I could do that was just helping young people in particular at that time, and helping them through the church, because I'd been there. I understood what they were going through, and for every teenager you go through so many issues, forming your identity. It was really good to be a part of a lot of people's lives during that time.
So being at the church that you were at, it was a lot bigger.
It was a big, yeah.
How did you adapt to that as being a person that saw that you needed to bring change into the church for young people to stay at church, and now you're at this massive church? What was that like?
It was a bit different because we made ourselves involved in, with the group of young people there, which there were a couple of hundred young people coming to a Friday night at the church we went to. So, it was a different kind of church to the ones I've grown up at.
And how do you answer people's questions when they don't like God or they don't want God in their lives? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I get where people are coming from. I mean, it takes faith to believe in something you can't see. And I think the church has a lot to answer for in the way that, the wrongdoings of the past and even the present that often make the media. There's people's objections are often that Christians are too legalistic, or too many rules and focused on those things, or too hypocritical, like they say one thing but they don't live it out themselves. But when you go back to what Jesus was on about, you actually see that Jesus had a big problem with people who were legalistic and hypocritical too. He had a lot to say about the religious people of his day who were in those things, and Jesus showed a better way. So for me, the things that Jesus said, the things that he did, they happened in history. I believe that. Historians will agree that. So if he is who he says he is, and he's about what he says he's about, and we're willing to take notice, then for me there's a lot in that, and there's a lot in that for everyone. He says he came to give life, and life in its fullness, and that's for every person, not to take life away or make life hard. Life's not easy. It doesn't mean that life's going to be rosy, but I think for every person there's life in its fullness, and God's the one who made us. He knows how we tick, and that's what he wants for us. He's for us, not against us.
So how do you know that God loves you in particular? Just you, not everyone else, because he loves everyone. We know that, you've shared that. But how do you know that God loves you in particular?
I believe that I just got to believe what he says. We've got this gift of Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, but the stories were written down, so we can go back and read that and understand that. We can choose not to believe it, and plenty of people do. But for me, I trust those things are true, and I guess my experience of people who believe the same thing, my experience of learning and trusting along the way, trusting God, praying, those kind of things have confirmed to me that God is real, and that he loves me, and that my want to make a difference actually is making a difference in people's lives.
So if there are people, young people in particular, that are listening to this right now who are really resonating with what you said before about the church is boring and they don't really want to go, or that they don't believe in this God thing, like, what would you say to those young people who are on the edge of that? Yeah.
Oh, look, I get it. And there's plenty of churches that are still having trouble expressing the good stuff in a way that is relevant to people today for all the complexity of the world. But go back to the source, which is Jesus, it's the Bible, and find some people who can unpack that with you and help you understand what it means. Because, again, Jesus is actually for the things that most people are for, love and peace, and he's against the things that most people have a problem with. So I think a lot of people, if they really got down to it, don't have a problem with Jesus. They have a problem with the way he's expressed in the church. But that said, I believe that it doesn't have to be that way, and churches in different places are expressing and living out what Jesus believed in ways that are making a real positive difference in their communities and amongst people, and Christians are doing the same. So don't write the baby off with the bathwater, if that makes sense.
That does. Thank you, Matt. This is Life First with Sarah and Matt, and I'm talking with Matt today, exploring his story a little bit more and going a little bit deeper as well. It's been very exciting so far. So what else were you getting up to? You're volunteering, studying, working part-time, and your wife was doing the same thing. What else were you getting up to?
Well, we did get some pets around that stage.
Okay.
We were living at a unit,
Yeah.
and the landlord said no pets because it was pretty small.
Oh, okay.
But my wife had pet rats growing up, and so she said, if we kept these rats in like a cage aquarium and they didn't come out, is that okay? And somehow he said yes. So our first pets as a married couple were rats. Well, actually one rat.
One rat. Okay.
But we called the rat Sassy because we can.
Why not?
But we didn't have the rat long before we thought we were overfeeding it because it was getting pretty fat.
Oh, no.
And then the next day after we noticed that it was getting pretty fat, it wasn't so fat anymore, but it had 10 little rat babies in the cage, which if you've ever seen them, they're these just tiny little jelly beans, no fur, just no eyes not open. And so I was like, what do we do? It's how do we deal with like baby rats in the house? I know how some people would deal with them, but no, these were our pets. So so we Googled, what do you do? And just said, let the mum look after him, look after the mum. And so for the first little while, first few weeks there, months even, we just had 11 rats. Most of the time they stayed in the aquarium. And then I do have a few photos where they came out and all around the place. But we eventually, the pet shop was happy to buy them back, or trade them back for a pack of rat food. And so we kept one of the babies and the mum. So that was our adventure of our first pets.
What was the baby's name? Do you remember?
Oh, well, they all had, because there were 10 of them, they all had sort of slightly different patterns. And this one had a pattern that looked a little bit like a sailboat. So it became Sailboat. Yeah. So we had all sorts.
That's very cute.
So Sassy and Sailboat.
Besides the fact that it's a rat, that's a really cute name.
I wasn't so keen, but anyway, that was our first pet.
Okay, so what other pets did you have after that?
Well, rats don't tend to last that many years, so we did replace those rats, and then as we moved, we eventually got a dog, which was beautiful Pomeranian. No, what was it? A Papillon.
Papillon. Okay.
Which, very placid dog. But unfortunately, it didn't. It ran across the road and didn't get to the other side. So we lost that one. And so we've had dogs since. We currently have a bit of a zoo at home.
Okay. What's in your zoo?
Yeah. Well, look. Fast forwarding the story.
Yes, true. Okay.
We now have kids, so we've got another dog.
Okay, one.
We've got a pet. Yeah, we do have another rat.
Okay, didn't go away from the rat. And any extraordinary stories there to do with the rats?
No, they haven't been around very long.
Okay, nothing yet.
But we've now got a bearded dragon.
A bearded dragon, okay, that's 3.
Yeah,
3 everyone for keeping count.
Got a rabbit, which is my daughter's.
4.
And a bird, a green-cheeked conure, which is, friendly little critter. I think that's all.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's all that you've ever mentioned to me.
Well, we've got 4 kids, so they have kind of one each. That's how the zoo has grown.
Okay, what's your pet then?
Well, the dog is kind of everyone's pet, yeah.
So,
Dogs make themselves comfortable wherever they are. It's just what they do.
Okay, so you and your wife don't particularly have one favourite pet out of all of them?
I was happy with but just we've seemed to grow. The deal is that the kids look after their own pets, but it doesn't quite work that way in practice.
Got to bring the kids in to get their side of the story now.
will, yeah.
Yes, to make sure. Okay. Right, so you've had some nice pets along the way with some funny stories.
Yeah, yep, and yep, everyone who with pets knows you lose some along the way as well. So
Yes.
yeah.
What about growing up? Did you have any pets, even though you moved around a lot?
Well, apart from the occasional goldfish, we only one farming town we lived in. We had a bigger backyard, so we managed to get some pet ducks
Cool.
and little chickens as well.
Fluffy bantams?
Silky bantams.
The
Yes.
fluffy ones?
Fluffy.
Oh, I wanted them.
So they were our pets there. They roamed around the yard. But apart from that, no, we didn't really get pets because we moved so much. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to have to ask, because there's probably kids listening. Did they all have names? Do you remember their names?
Yeah, we had Brandy and Snap were the ducks.
Okay.
And the chickens were black and white, so they were Pepsi and Sprite. So we just...
That's great.
They were crazy.
That's awesome.
Good times.
I like that. Yes, just naming after the colour of them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we seem to fast forward now. So you were at uni, you studied, did you finish study?
Yeah, so I got a job as a youth pastor at a church.
And what year was this?
This was, I don't know what year it was.
In the 2000s or 90s?
Yeah, we're in the 2000s.
Okay, we're in 2000s, yeah.
So got a job, so I looked after a group of young people at a church. Got paid to do it as part-time while I was studying as well. So that was a really good experience. But my studies came to an end, and it came to the point, during that process, I've just really clarified that what I believe God was calling me to do was to be a minister and to be in the Uniting Church as a minister, not just for young people, but for all ages. So that's a priest, ordained. So
how did you know that?
It was a bit of a process because I'd been looking out for young people at the time, and I loved doing that. But I recognised that it was, there's all people are valuable. So, people at the end of life, people at the beginning, and I was getting older too. Still young, but and a part of it too was just growing up and seeing people leave the church. That to shape the whole church in a positive way could be something that I could contribute. So, that was a long process of meeting. It wasn't just me who decided that, and they said yep, but there was committees and others involved in. It's a process. Most churches have that process to make sure that you're really clear on your calling before you go into that kind of thing. And then as we came to the end of study, we weren't sure where we'd end up. Would we have to move to the country, be in the city? And there was an opportunity to have a conversation with the church over on the Eyre Peninsula in the town called Cummins.
So you were ordained or whatever. What is that called before all this opportunity?
Yeah, so so the way it worked for me is that we were sent out, and then after a year or so we were officially ordained.
Okay, cue the picture of you being ordained.
Yes, that's it. So that happened a year or so after. But yes, so we at that point we were about to have our first child. So we're kind of not keen to go far into the country.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, after we had a conversation with this church, which was actually 4 churches in an area over there on the Eyre Peninsula, we just thought this is great, this is right for us, and we ended up over there in 2009. We ended up moving everything with our 3-month-old baby to the Eyre Peninsula into a farming community where I looked after 3 churches, which was 4 at the beginning, across a wide area. Got to have lots of rides on tractors and headers. Got to meet people. There was sort of 5 different sports teams represented across the churches and communities that I visited. So it was really good. There were a lot of young families around at the time also having children, young farmers. Mm-hmm. So we fitted in really well, but it was also big to get head around leading churches in different communities, being a new family. And so we were there a few years. We had 2 more children over there. So, but as much as we loved it, we were kind of open to moving back a little closer to Adelaide and where our family was.
I'm chatting with Matt here on Life Versus Sarah, and Matt is sharing a little bit more about his story here on Life Versus with Sarah and Matt. So you're over there looking after 4 churches, which then became 3. What does that even look like to somebody who has never done that before?
Yeah, it was a little bit to get your head around, because every community is unique. Even the 2 communities, the major ones, Lock and Cummins, were quite different. You couldn't talk to the farmers and compare how much, the quantity of harvest per paddock kind of thing. It varied because of the rainfall and the area. So there was that to get your head around. In the church, I set up an arrangement so that I would sometimes do 2 on one Sunday and 1 the other. Some weeks that was all over the shop, and then there are other weeks there were other things on as well. So it was a unique experience, but really country people, really down to earth, really friendly, really genuine. I guess what life in the suburbs was probably like 50 years ago, in some, in the good ways, that there's still some wholesome values that perhaps slips away in some places closer to the city. But so we love that, and the way people, their hospitality, and we were really welcomed and embraced, particularly as someone straight out of college and learning as you go along.
Yeah, that's lovely. And this is the part of the story where we now end up somewhat here.
Yes.
So the first time I ever heard about you, Matt, I was at Echunga Uniting Church, and the previous minister and his family had to leave after the church service because we were going to be talking about this new and exciting minister and his family that were going to be coming, and this big projector screen up at the front of the church and had listed all of these different things about you. We'd never met you, we'd never seen a picture of you, but there were all these exciting things, and one of them was that he had been in radio. And pretty much everybody in that church turned to me and said that we'd be doing something together.
Yeah.
And how about that? Almost 7 years, is that right? Later, we're doing something in radio together, and something a lot bigger now than that. So it was very exciting when you came to Echunga. Everybody was very excited. How did that come about, and how did you as a family feel moving back to Adelaide again?
Yeah, well, look, we're really excited when the conversation came up with the church at Echunga that it wasn't in the city. It was still kind of country-ish town. Okay. We loved that country aspect, but also that it was close to where our family were, closer. And so, we had that, we had a conversation, went really well. So we thought this is where we need to be and where we need to go. So we moved to Echunga, and again, got to know a whole new community, the community of the church, the community around it. And again, we had 3 kids by then, and another was soon on the way. Yes. So got to know yourself and others around. Really, another great kind of country-ish community in a different kind of way.
Yes, it was very exciting, and I must say, cue the photo of Matt being welcomed. Is that the right word?
Yeah,
into
that was
the church?
7 years ago or so.
7 years ago. It is a while.
Yes.
But you've had another kid since then, and I do remember you went to the meeting of Hills Radio after your child had been born on the same. Is that right? You tell the story. It's your story, not mine.
Yeah, so Hills Radio was sort of just getting off the ground back around the time he was born. And so snuck out of the hospital. Hills Radio had a bit of a meeting. I think there was pizza, so that was an incentive. So got to come out and meet people there. But that was really good because when we moved back to Adelaide, I was able to get involved in a community radio station for a little bit. When we moved to the Eyre Peninsula, there wasn't anything around for me to be involved in that as a hobby. So when Hills Radio opened up in Mount Barker in the hills, I thought this is a great opportunity to do something again. It's community, and it's a unique skill set of something to have experience growing up that I could jump into. And Sarah, you had those skills too. So
Yes,
we came
right.
up with this idea of a show. It took us a while. Let's call it Life Bursts.
Yeah, it didn't just happen like that. We had to write it down on pieces of paper, and we were like, I think we got life first, and then the burst was hard at the end. Like I thought life burst, like the burst part was really lame, but you really liked it. So then I was like, okay, fine, we'll go with it, and we'll see where this rolls. And now it's really popular. So we're doing this.
Here we are, into a new phase. So that was a great journey, and we have had lots of people over a number of years come and share their stories like I'm doing today, and that's why we love it. And for me, part of the motivation was that as a minister, I get to share with people at the end of their life and at their funerals, looking back at a life, and people are constantly amazed at what they hear at a funeral. So we know people's stories are powerful and that people have done a lot. So to be able to share those stories before someone dies, whether they're young or old, is great. You can't argue with a story. You can't. People are fascinating.
So how have you changed as a minister and as a person since moving to Etrunga? Because you were just a new kid out of college, over there, and now you're here at Etrunga. How have you changed? What have you learned?
Yeah, well, I've lost a bit more hair and it's gone a bit grayer, but I think that's just a sign that we all should be growing all the time. We all should be learning from our experiences, whether they're mistakes or wins. So I would hope to say that I've grown and learned along the way. Bit more being young and being a leader is not always easy when you're leading people who are older than you. So being confident in what you are there to do, to lead people, and to do that in the church by serving them as well as giving some direction in a positive way. That's, I guess, something that I've become more confident in as I've got grayer and over the years.
Not that much older.
But hopefully we all do grow. And that I've been able to do that a bit too.
And how have you grown deeper and closer with God?
It's been fascinating to, I think, the church and life should always be done with other people, and we can learn from other people. And so to have learned from other people's experiences, painful ones, and some miracles along the way, that's opened my eyes to a whole bunch of areas that I kind of believed in my head but have seen is possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that works. It's kind of like you're taught something and you feel like it happens to other people. It would never happen to me, but it's actually happened to you.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Yeah,
so the more we get to know people, and we should, and listen to them and hear their stories, the more we can grow. I think that's a great encouragement for all of us to help understand the things that, where there's differences of belief or even the things you believe, that they become real.
Our final question with the last 2 minutes of our show. What piece of advice would you like to leave with our listeners today? Yeah, well, apart from, listen to each other, for me, going back to my experience and my story and my calling, I think it's just an encouragement for people to not just write off anything because it's what you've been told, but seek to understand it. And particularly when it comes to the Christian faith, there's plenty of people who believe it and still live it out across the world, and there's plenty of bad stuff, but what's at the core of it, don't write it off without looking into it for yourself, because for me, in it is life and life in its fullness. So if there's people who believe that, then look into it before writing it off. Find the good stuff in it and live it out. Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you for sharing a burst of your life with us today. It has been fabulous, so thank you. Pleasure. It's been good. This is our first program, and we'll continue to share each other's stories. And next week,
Sarah's in the hot seat.
Yes.
And we get to hear your story of growing up with juvenile arthritis, which is a pretty unique condition, and some of your story through that and all the other things you've been doing. So I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about that next week too.
Yeah, this has been Life Bursts. You can catch up wherever you get your podcasts from, or jump onto YouTube. This is Life Bursts. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Matt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Life Bursts is hosted by Matthew Carratt and Sarah Freeman, with production by Reese Jarrett and Kay Hoshraw Ozadigan, with additional assistance by Brett Freeman. For more episodes of Life Bursts, go to rawcut.com.au. This is a RawCut production.